The CEO didn't walk into our store to check the inventory. He came to tell us that someone in our group was about to face a decade behind bars for a criminal enterprise. Within 60 seconds, the marble floors of our luxury boutique would turn into a trap, and I realized the person he was hunting wasn't a stranger. It was standing right next to me. The marble floors of the flagship store were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the glittering chandeliers that hung like frozen rain from the ceiling. I stood behind the counter, smoothing out my apron, feeling the familiar weight of exhaustion settling into my shoulders. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the air feels heavy, with the scent of overpriced perfume and the hum of the climate control system. My co-workers, Sarah and Marcus, were leaning against the glass displays, gossiping in low, melodic tones. We were laughing, a genuine, unbridled sound that felt out of place in a store where the cheapest item cost more than my monthly rent. "I'm telling you," Sarah giggled, wiping a tear from her eye. She walked out with 3 handbags, and when I asked if she needed help with the tags, she looked at me like I'd just insulted her lineage. The audacity of the wealthy never ceases to amaze me. Marcus snorted, adjusting his silk tie. "It's not audacity, darling. It's a total lack of touch with reality. They think the world is a stage, and we're just the stagehands meant to stay in the shadows. Honestly, I live for the day one of them trips over their own ego." I joined in, letting out a soft chuckle. "Careful, Marcus. If you keep talking like that, you might actually get promoted to management. They love people who can spot a fake personality from a mile away." We were mid-laugh, the sound echoing slightly against the high, ornate ceilings, when the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a sudden change, not at first. It was a subtle tightening, like a string being wound too taut. I noticed it in the way the security guard at the door, who usually spent his time checking his phone, suddenly straightened his spine and tucked his hands behind his back. The chatter of the few customers scattered throughout the store died down, replaced by a sudden, heavy stillness. Then the main entrance doors swung open, not with the casual grace of a visitor, but with the calculated precision of a professional. Silence rippled through the room like a wave. Everyone stopped what they were doing. I felt my own smile falter, frozen on my lips, as I watched the figure walking toward us. It was Julian Vane, the CEO. I had seen his face on the cover of magazines and in company newsletters, but he looked different in person. He was taller than I imagined, draped in a charcoal gray suit that looked like it had been tailored for a king. He wasn't just walking, he was stalking the floor, his eyes scanning every display, every employee, every inch of space, with an intensity that made the skin on the back of my neck prickle. He didn't look at the merchandise. He didn't look at the customers. His gaze was fixed solely on our little group behind the service counter. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, irregular rhythm that I was sure he could hear from 10 feet away. Sarah's face had gone paper white, and Marcus had dropped his casual posture so quickly he nearly stumbled. The jovial atmosphere of just seconds ago felt like a distant, forbidden memory. Vane stopped 3 feet from us. He didn't say hello. He didn't offer a professional greeting. He just stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, staring at us as if he were trying to memorize the way our fear looked. The store was deathly quiet. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick plush carpet. He leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing, and for a moment I wondered if he had heard our conversation. But as he spoke, his voice was low, smooth, and chillingly devoid of emotion. "I trust," he began, his voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel, "that the inventory in the back office matches the digital logs exactly. Because if there is even a single discrepancy, a missing item, a misplaced digit, or anything that suggests a lack of total integrity, the consequences will be far more severe than anyone here is prepared for." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air, thick and suffocating. My throat went dry. I tried to swallow, but I couldn't move. He hadn't come here to inspect the store. He had come for something else. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulled out a small metallic flash drive, and laid it on the glass counter. It landed with a soft final click that felt like a gavel striking a desk. "I have reason to believe," Vane continued, his gaze locking onto mine with terrifying precision. That this store is being used as a staging ground for something much darker than retail. My internal team has been monitoring a suspicious network for weeks, and they've traced the origin point directly to this counter. He paused, and the air left my lungs. My pulse was roaring in my ears now, a deafening sound. "I'm not here to talk about handbags, employees," he whispered, stepping even closer. "I'm here to figure out which one of you is facilitating the illegal movement of restricted goods, and exactly who in this room is about to face an accusation by the Service of Internal Security for a criminal enterprise that will result in a decade behind bars." My gaze shifted to the flash drive, then back to his cold, calculating eyes. I knew what was on it. I knew exactly what he was looking for. And as I looked at Sarah and Marcus, who were both staring at the floor, refusing to meet his eyes, the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The game wasn't just over, it was never really a game at all. And I knew with a sinking hollow dread that the person he was hunting wasn't a stranger. It was someone standing right next to me. The silence that followed Vane's words wasn't just quiet. It was heavy, suffocating, and charged with the static of 1,000 unspoken secrets. I felt the sweat prickling at my hairline, a cold, sharp sensation. Sarah's breathing had become shallow and uneven, a jagged sound that tore through the stillness of the room. Marcus, usually so quick with a quip or a sarcastic observation, was now staring at the floor with a rigidity that suggested he was trying to make himself invisible. Vane didn't move. He remained a statue of polished obsidian, his eyes flicking from me to Sarah and then lingering on Marcus with a predator's patience. "I don't make idle threats," he added, his voice dropping into a tone so soft it was almost intimate. "The Service of Internal Security is already in the building. They are currently reviewing the security footage from the last 48 hours. If the truth doesn't come out in the next 60 seconds, I'm going to let them handle the discovery process. And I assure you, they aren't as polite as I am." 60 seconds. The clock on the wall, a minimalist piece of art that usually went unnoticed, suddenly seemed to tick with the sound of a hammer striking an anvil. Every second felt like an eternity. I racked my brain trying to think of anything, any anomaly, any strange request, any slip-up I might have witnessed. I had been so focused on the mundane misery of retail that I hadn't realized the foundation of my life had been rotting beneath me. I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Vane," Sarah finally stammered, her voice cracking. She took a half-step back, her hands trembling as she smoothed her apron. "We're just sales associates. We handle the floor, we process returns, we help the customers. We don't have access to the shipping manifest or the secure storage area. How could we be involved in any organized scheme?" Vane let out a short, humorless laugh that made my blood run cold. "Do you think I'm naive, Sarah? I know exactly who has keys to the secure vault. I know exactly who has the bypass codes for the inventory scanners. And I know that in the last 2 weeks, we've had 3 mismatched shipments of high-end jewelry that were logged as returned, but never actually arrived back at the warehouse." He reached out and tapped the flash drive. "This contains the digital footprint of every transaction made from this terminal, including the ones that were deleted from the store's main server." My heart did a somersault. I had seen Marcus spending an unusual amount of time on the terminal during his lunch breaks, but I had just assumed he was checking his social media or playing games. I felt a sudden, sharp spike of betrayal. Was it Marcus? Could the person I'd shared coffee with, the person who had commiserated with me about our low wages for years, really be at the center of an organized network involving restricted goods? "Marcus?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Marcus didn't look up. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the counter. "Don't look at me like that, Chloe," he muttered, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "None of us are saints. You think they pay us enough to live in this city? You think they care about us at all? They treat us like biological machines, replaceable the moment we stop being profitable." "That doesn't justify a criminal enterprise, Marcus," I snapped, my voice rising in panic. "Doesn't it?" He finally looked up, his eyes bright with a dangerous, manic energy. "They move millions in profit while we struggle to pay for transit. If you didn't notice the packages, it's because you didn't want to. You wanted the perks of the job, the bonuses, the stability. You turned a blind eye just as much as I did. "That is a lie," I shouted, my voice echoing off the marble. "I never signed off on those shipments." Vane stepped forward, towering over us. "Enough. The internal security team is coming through the service entrance as we speak. I'm going to offer you all one chance. One. The first person to explain exactly where those packets with the substance are hidden gets to walk away with their life intact. Everyone else? They're going to be facing a serious accusation of being an accomplice to a major distribution ring, and they will be spending the rest of their youth behind bars." He looked at his watch, a slim, diamond-encrusted piece that cost more than a small house. 10 seconds, or I signal the team." I looked at Sarah, who was sobbing into her hands. I looked at Marcus, who was suddenly grinning with a terrifying, hollow desperation. Then the sound of heavy, booted footsteps echoed from the back office corridor. The door swung open, and 2 men in tactical gear, their faces hidden behind dark visors, entered the room, holding files that looked like death warrants. "Time's up," Vane said, his eyes locking onto mine. "Chloe, you seem like the most honest of the group. Tell me, where did Marcus hide the shipment that arrived last night? Because if you don't answer, I'm going to tell them you're the one who signed the manifest." I stood paralyzed, the air trapped in my throat, as the security officers began to fan out, their presence turning our luxury boutique into a claustrophobic cage. I knew the answer, but the moment the words left my lips, there would be no turning back. I realized then that the truth wouldn't save me. It would only make me the target. My eyes darted to the display case behind me, and I saw something that stopped my heart cold. A small, dark smudge on the floor that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. The smudge on the floor was faint, a slight discoloration against the pristine Italian marble, but to my eyes, it screamed. It wasn't just dirt. It was the residue of something coarse, a fine, dark powder that had drifted from the base of the storage pedestal. My mind raced, connecting the dots with sickening speed. The late-night shipments, the extra inventory audits, Marcus insisted on performing alone, the way he'd been so careful to hover near this specific display for the last 3 days. The security team didn't wait for my answer. The lead officer, a man with a jawline like granite and eyes that saw through everything, marched straight toward the pedestal. Marcus suddenly lunged forward, his face contorting into a mask of pure, frantic desperation. "No, don't touch that!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with a hysteria that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Stay back!" one of the security men barked, pulling a pair of zip ties from his tactical vest. The store felt like it was shrinking. The ambient light seemed to dim, focusing solely on the center of the room where the pedestal stood. Vane didn't even flinch. He watched the scene with the cold detachment of a spectator at a play, his hands still clasped firmly behind his back. "The vault code, Marcus," Vane said, his voice dropping into a register that felt like a death sentence. "Give it up now, or I ensure that your family name is dragged through every news outlet in the country. You'll be labeled the architect of this entire criminal scheme. You will be the one facing the heaviest charges for the distribution of these prohibited substances." Marcus collapsed to his knees, his bravado evaporating into thin air. He looked smaller, broken, a hollow shell of the colleague I thought I knew. "I didn't start it," he sobbed, the tears carving clean tracks through the dust on his face. "I was just a courier. They forced me. If I hadn't moved the packages, they said they'd—" "Who?" Vane interrupted, stepping closer. "Who told you to facilitate the movement of these goods?" Marcus looked up, his eyes darting toward the back of the store, toward the office where the manager, a woman named Elena, who had been with the company for 20 years, was supposed to be working. But the office was empty. The door was slightly ajar, the light inside flickering erratically. "She's not here, Marcus," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "Elena isn't in her office. She hasn't been back there since the doors opened this morning." The lead security officer signaled his team, and they moved toward the office with practiced, lethal efficiency. Vane glanced at me, his gaze lingering for a second too long, as if he were trying to read a map of my soul. "You have a sharp eye, Chloe. It's a shame you were surrounded by such incompetence. It makes me wonder if you were really as oblivious as you claim, or if you were just playing the long game, waiting for the right moment to pivot." "I told you I didn't know," I shouted, my voice raw. "We'll see what the digital audit says," he replied, turning away as a loud crash erupted from the back office. A heavy wooden chair flew through the doorway, followed by the sound of glass shattering. The display cabinet in the manager's office had been decimated. The officers rushed in, and seconds later a series of muffled shouts and the heavy thud of a struggle filled the air. I held my breath, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of the counter. Then the lead officer emerged from the office. He wasn't alone. He was dragging someone by the collar. Not Elena, but a man I'd never seen before, dressed in the dark uniform of our high-end security provider. He was struggling, his face bruised and bleeding, his eyes wild with a fanatic, dangerous intensity. He was holding a remote device in his cuffed hand, his thumb hovering over a red button. "Down!" the officer roared, tackling the man to the floor. The remote skidded across the floor, sliding toward my feet. My eyes were glued to it. It wasn't just a remote, it was a detonator. The man on the floor erupted into a manic laugh that made my skin crawl. "You think you've caught us?" he spat, blood bubbling at his lips. "You've been playing right into the trap. The shop isn't just a storage point, it's a pressure cooker, and the timer isn't set for the police arrival. It's set for the CEO's departure." Vane froze. He looked down at the floor, then at the device, then back at me. The air in the store shifted again, but this time it wasn't the tension of a discovery. It was the icy, absolute dread of an impending end. The floor began to vibrate, a low, rhythmic hum rising from the foundation of the building. "Get out!" Vane roared, his voice losing all its cool, calculated composure. He lunged toward the exit, but the heavy electronic doors slammed shut, locking with a final, metallic clank. The hum grew into a high-pitched whine, and the lights overhead began to strobe, casting long, frantic shadows across the store. I saw the red light on the device at my feet begin to pulse, slowly at first, then faster. The man on the floor laughed again, a sound of pure, unadulterated madness. "It's not just about the packages, Vane. It's about taking the whole empire down with us." I reached down, my hand shaking uncontrollably, and grabbed the device. As my fingers touched the cold plastic casing, I felt a sharp, burning sensation, a signal being transmitted. I looked up to see the entire security glass wall of the store begin to frost over, locking us inside. And then I saw the true face of the person who had been standing in the shadows, holding the second half of the detonator. It was someone I recognized instantly, someone who had been standing right behind Vane the entire time, their face twisted in a smile that contained no humanity at all. The person standing behind Vane wasn't a stranger. It was Marcus's younger brother, Leo, who had been hired only 2 weeks ago as a stockroom trainee. He had spent his days acting the part of the quiet, clumsy kid, tripping over boxes and apologizing profusely. But now, as he stood there with a second, matching remote in his hand, his posture had shifted. The slouch was gone. The fumbling, nervous energy had been replaced by the cold, calculated posture of a professional soldier. His eyes, once soft and unassuming, were now dead, reflecting the harsh strobe of the emergency lights. Vane spun around, his face a mask of shock that quickly curdled into pure rage. "You? The kid from the loading bay? You think you can pull this off, you insect?" Leo didn't even blink. He tapped the button on his remote, and the strobe lights ceased, replaced by a deep pulsing crimson light that flooded the showroom from the floorboards. "I don't think, Mr. Vane, I calculate, and my calculations show that your empire is built on the exploitation of people who have nothing left to lose. You thought we were just moving boxes, didn't you? You thought this was just a low-level hustle." He gestured to the store around us, the mannequins draped in designer silk looking like silent, judging witnesses to our nightmare. "This isn't a retail store, it's a node. A central server for your entire illicit communication network. My group isn't interested in your money, Vane. We're interested in the data hidden in the walls of this flagship. And since you decided to come down here yourself, we just hit the jackpot." The floor beneath us groaned, a deep, structural sound that rattled my teeth. Dust began to shower down from the ceiling tiles. I was still clutching the first detonator, my heart hammering so hard I was sure it would tear through my ribs. If I moved, if I even breathed too heavily, I felt like the whole place would vaporize. Vane reached into his jacket, his hand moving toward a hidden holster. "Drop the trigger, Leo." The internal security team has a sniper on the roof. They've had you in their sights since you stepped into this building." Leo laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "There is no sniper. Your communication lines were cut the moment you stepped through those doors. You're isolated, Vane. You're not a CEO anymore. You're just a man in a box with a bomb." I glanced toward the front entrance. The glass wasn't just frosted, it was beginning to spiderweb. The pressure was building. I looked back at Leo, then at the detonator in my hand. I realized then that the device I held wasn't just a detonator for the store's interior. It was a receiver, and if I could manipulate the frequency, I might be able to scramble the signal between Leo and the explosive charge underneath the floorboards. But to do that, I needed to get closer. "Marcus," I whispered, my voice trembling. He was still on the floor, weeping, his face hidden in his hands. "Marcus, look at me." He didn't move. I kicked his leg, harder than I intended. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and terrified. I gestured subtly toward the floor, toward the space beneath the display where the packages, the restricted substances that had triggered this entire disaster, were stashed. I knew there was a heavy-duty wrench in the toolkit behind the counter, hidden in the bottom drawer. "Marcus," I hissed, "get the wrench. Not for them, for the floor grate. We have to vent the pressure, or we all go up in smoke." He looked at me, then at Leo, then at the device in my hand. His eyes widened. He understood. As Leo began to pace, gloating over Vane, Marcus moved with a speed I hadn't realized he possessed. He scrambled behind the counter, his hand plunging into the drawer. Vane was still talking, trying to stall, his voice steady even though his brow was damp with sweat. "You want money, Leo? I can transfer 50 million to any offshore account you want. Just walk away. You're too young to waste your life in a dark cell for a stunt like this." 50 million? Leo scoffed, taking a step toward Vane. "Your money is worthless when the evidence in this building goes public. You're already a ghost, Vane. You just don't know it yet." That was the distraction I needed. As Leo turned his focus entirely on the CEO, Marcus slammed the heavy iron wrench into the side of the display cabinet, shattering the reinforced glass. The sound was like a gunshot. Leo whirled around, his finger twitching on the trigger. "Don't!" Leo roared, leveling his gaze at the space where the explosives were planted. But I was already moving. I lunged forward, throwing the receiver I held toward Leo, hoping to knock his hand off balance. The plastic device flew through the air, clattering against his chest. He gasped, dropping his guard for a split second. That was the moment. I dove across the floor, aiming for his legs, tackling him with every ounce of frustration and fear I'd bottled up for years. We hit the floor hard, and the remote skidded away into the dark, narrow gap beneath the display. I heard the beep-beep-beep of the timer accelerating, a frantic, high-pitched scream of electronics. Leo and I wrestled for the lead, but suddenly the floor beneath us cracked. A plume of white smoke erupted from the fissure, and the lights in the store surged, turning blindingly bright, then snapping to complete, absolute black. In the sudden darkness, I felt a hand grab my collar and yank me backward, away from the struggle. It wasn't Leo, it was Vane. He dragged me toward the office doorway, his grip like iron. "The floor is going to drop," he screamed over the mounting mechanical roar of the building's internal systems. As we reached the doorway, a deafening blast tore through the center of the showroom. The ground beneath the display, and everyone standing near it, vanished into a dark, yawning pit. I saw Leo's silhouette for one final, haunting second as he plummeted into the abyss, his eyes fixed on me with a smile of pure, victorious malice. Then the ceiling began to collapse, and the entire store started to tilt. I looked down into the crater and realized the explosive hadn't just destroyed the display. It had exposed a hidden underground tunnel, a vast network that shouldn't have existed. And standing in the mouth of that tunnel, looking up at us with a familiar face I had seen in the company's own leadership directory, was the person who had been pulling the strings all along. The collapse was deafening, a symphony of twisted steel and shattering marble that vibrated through my very bones. As the floor tilted, a massive support pillar groaned, then buckled, throwing dust and debris into the air until the showroom looked like a battlefield. Vane was still gripping my jacket, his face pale and eyes wide, not with the arrogance of a CEO, but with the raw primal fear of a man who had realized he was merely a pawn in a game far larger than his own company. "Get down!" he roared, shoving me behind a heavy mahogany desk just as a chunk of the ceiling plummeted where we had been standing moments before. I crouched, my lungs burning with pulverized dust, staring into the gaping, dark maw where the store's floor had once been. In the dim, flickering light of a dangling emergency chandelier, I saw them. Standing at the base of the tunnel, lit by a rhythmic, cold blue light, was the chief financial officer, a woman I had only seen once at an annual company gala. She wasn't just standing there. She was surrounded by rows of server racks and crates of what were clearly marked as prohibited goods. She looked up at us, her expression not one of surprise, but of profound, icy indifference. "You really should have stayed in the dark, Julian," she called out, her voice amplified by the cavernous depth of the tunnel. "You were the perfect front. Your arrogance made you blind, and your obsession with growth made you the perfect shield for our distribution network. But you've become a liability." Vane tried to stand, reaching for his weapon, but he stumbled, his face twisting in pain as a piece of falling debris had clearly caught his leg. You were behind the internal security logs. You were the one framing the store." "I am the one who owns the store," she corrected, her voice chillingly calm. She tapped a tablet, and the metal shutters covering the store's exterior windows hissed open, revealing a row of unmarked black vans pulling up to the curb. "By the time the authorities arrive, this building will be condemned. You will be the primary suspect in an investigation regarding a major criminal scheme, and I will be miles away with the data that controls half the city's private commerce." The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burnt plastic. I knew we had seconds. Marcus, who had miraculously survived the collapse of the floor, crawled toward me, his hands bloody and his expression dazed. "Chloe," he gasped, pointing at the wall behind the desk. "The circuit breaker. If we hit the overload, we can trigger the building's fire suppression system. It's foam-based, but it's high pressure. It might collapse the tunnel entrance." It was a suicide mission. The electrical panel was sparking, spitting blue flames like a trapped animal. But as the CFO began to turn away, retreating into the depths of the tunnel, something clicked. I realized that the detonator I had held, the one Leo dropped, wasn't just a threat. It was a bridge. "Do it!" I screamed at Marcus. I stood up, ignoring the debris falling around me, and sprinted toward the wall. My hands were shaking, but I grabbed the heavy lever of the breaker box. I didn't just pull it. I jammed it upward with every ounce of rage I felt for the life they had tried to steal from me. A massive bone-jarring arc of electricity surged through the room, snapping like a whip. The ceiling groaned, and the massive fire suppression sprinklers erupted with the force of a tidal wave. The room filled instantly with thick, pressurized foam. It poured into the crater, flooding the tunnel entrance like a white waterfall. We heard the CFO scream, not in defiance but in frustration, as the torrent of foam engulfed the equipment, short-circuiting the servers and collapsing the unstable tunnel entrance under the weight of the deluge. The store went silent, save for the hiss of the sprinklers. The lights flickered and died, leaving us in a swirling, whitewashed purgatory. When the police and the true service of internal security finally breached the doors 10 minutes later, they found a scene of absolute devastation. But they also found something else. I had managed to pull the flash drive from my pocket before the blast, and Marcus had found the CFO's tablet, which had slid into the rubble near the desk. Vane was taken into custody, screaming about conspiracies and betrayal, his empire crumbling in the wake of the news. The CFO was captured 3 blocks away, trapped in traffic by the very chaos she had unleashed. The trial took months. I spent most of it in small, quiet rooms, giving testimony that would eventually topple the highest levels of the company. It wasn't justice in the sense of a tidy, happy ending. My life had been upended, the store was gone, and the trauma of those minutes in the dark would haunt me for years. But as I walked out of the courthouse on the final day, the sun felt warmer than I remembered. I looked down at the paper in my hand, a settlement agreement and a clean slate. I had no interest in luxury retail, no interest in the fast-paced, cutthroat world of the elite, and certainly no interest in secrets. I walked past the shuttered remains of the flagship store, which was now being cleared for demolition. A small crowd was gathered outside, journalists and onlookers, but I kept my head down, my pace steady. As I reached the corner, Marcus caught up to me. He looked thinner, older, but he was smiling, a real smile for the first time. "Where to?" he asked, tucking his hands into his pockets. I looked at the busy, chaotic, honest world around us. "Somewhere quiet," I said. "Somewhere where nobody asks for a digital log, and where the only things in the cupboards are items that are actually meant to be there." He laughed, a soft, genuine sound. We walked away from the wreckage together, leaving the silence of the luxury store behind us, and for the first time in years, the weight on my shoulders finally lifted. The laughter that had once been a foolish, naive sound in that store was now replaced by the steady, calm rhythm of a future I was finally allowed to choose for myself. The silence was over, and for the first time, I was the one who got to decide what happened next.